Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be doing a video just looking at the various Asrock Z690 motherboards. This is mostly to give context to the Z690 motherboard roundup I did. I will be doing this same kind of thing for the other manufacturers as well, but we're going to start with Asrock because Asrock was completely missing from my Z690 motherboard roundup, and so I figured a lot of people might be interested in why it is that I decided that, Asrock motherboards aren't worthy, or like Asrock Z690 motherboards aren't worth buying. So let's get into that. Starting off with the Z690 Taichi, which this board goes for $590, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, that's shipped by Newegg. So this isn't some like third-party, seller marking the board up. This thing is $590. And for $590, you get a rear I/O worthy of a laptop. Okay, it's not quite that bad. There's a lot more audio ports than you'll get on any laptop ever, but you get a grand total of 6 USB Type-As. And I've mentioned this many times. When it comes to motherboards, I like postcodes, I like USB ports, I like PCIe slots, and I like VRMs. And everything else on the motherboard is borderline irrelevant to me. So this right here is not okay. Like, I refuse to pay, if I'm paying $100 per USB port, the motherboard either the motherboard is over $800, or it's over, it's just not okay. This is a almost $600 motherboard with 6 USB ports in the back, which is, I can't believe it. Also, it's got Thunderbolt, but no Thunderbolt inputs, like for the display inputs. So I don't know how you're going to get display pass-through on this because there's no display inputs for that. Other than that, well, that basically covers it. It's just really overpriced because, VRM-wise, we've got a VRM on par with what you get from Gigabyte for $470. PCIe slot-wise, you get the same functionality as a $400 MSI Z690 Carbon. M.2 slot-wise, you get the same kind of functionality that you would get. Actually, I think this is actually worse than what you get on a Carbon, so, this is $600, and it has the feature set of the feature set is somewhere between $400 and $500. Also, the dual LAN in the back is 2.5 gig Intel and 1 gig Intel, because that killer E3100, as far as I know, that's an Intel chip. So, the Z690 UniFi from MSI, which is a Z690 UniFi X from MSI, has dual 2.5 gig Intel LAN in the back, and more USB ports, and a bunch of extra overclocking features. This is awful. Also, the postcode is in the wrong place. The postcode does not belong on the bottom edge of the motherboard. It belongs up in the top right corner. But anyway, so this motherboard is very simple. This did not make it into the roundup because it is way too damn expensive and there's no justification for the price. And I'm really disappointed because historically, Asrock Taichi boards have been really good performance per dollar. And then something happened and Asrock has gone insane and started making really overpriced Taichi boards. I don't know why. Like the X570 Taichi was basically you got the most connectors for the least amount of money out of any X570 motherboard. It had more M.2 slots, more SATA ports, it was the most flexible motherboard in terms of internal connectors. This is competing with a $400 MSI board when it comes to internal connectivity, and it's losing on that. Okay? It is losing to a $400 MSI motherboard on internal connectivity. And the rear I/O is a catastrophe. This is just an absolute, unmitigated disaster. It's got 6 Type-As. You've got to be kidding me. So that's why the Taichi didn't make it. Anyway, next up, Wi-Fi 6E. Oh no. So this board is $290, something like that. Yeah, that's $290, isn't it? Yep, that's direct from Newegg. $290. What do we get for our $290? Well, we don't get any USB ports because there's a USB port shortage at the USB port factory. They run out. MSI and Gigabyte bought all the USB ports. Asrock can't put USB ports on their motherboards anymore. So you do get a BIOS flashback button, which is good to see because in this price range, both Gigabyte and MSI have, actually both MSI and Gigabyte have BIOS flashback basically on every single motherboard they produce these days. You get Wi-Fi 6E, which you can get from MSI for $250, so that's not a feature. So you know, that's not some incredible functionality here. You get 3 M.2 slots, I think, in total. You get a 2 Hyper M, yeah, 3 M.2 slots in total. Guess what you get on a $250 MSI board? 4. Get 4 M.2 slots, which, this is just more. So, you know, and this is basically how I do the motherboard roundups. Like, I compare the motherboards, and if the motherboard costs more and doesn't do more stuff, then it's not in the bloody list, because why would you pay extra to get less functionality? And really, I'm just massively offended by having 5 Type A ports in the rear I/O. Like, this is just awful. Like, what the hell even is this? But you know what you do get with this board? You get 2.5 gig and 1 gig LAN. So, I don't know, if you're building yourself some kind of weird server, this might be good for that. Anyway, what else do we get on the board? You do get troubleshooting LEDs, so that's, you know, a nice little addition. And the VRM on this is 13 60 amp smart power stages. And they're not saying if that's 13 just for, like, vCore or... Because, like, there's an iGPU rail on this board, right? There's an iGPU rail. There's display outputs. So there has to be an iGPU rail. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So this is probably a 12 plus 1 or maybe an 11 plus 2. But I'm pretty sure it's probably a 12 plus 1. The MSI board has 14 power stages in its vCore VRM. That's a 7-phase. But the thing is, like, the phase count is not the end goal, right? The end goal of a VRM is to provide power, and more power stages is how you get that. And the other thing is the heat sinks on this. They have a plastic rear I/O cover covering up one of the heat sinks. You know a funny thing about plastic airflow restrictors? They restrict airflow. They make things run hotter, and this has less power stages than that MSI board does. And it's also it's still a 6-layer PCB, so it's not like the PCB is going to help, you know, act as a better heatsink. And what else do we have? Well, that's kind of it, really. Is just like, so this, you know, it costs more. It doesn't really offer any extra functionality. The VRM isn't appreciably better in any way. The rear I/O is, in my opinion, just a catastrophe. Like, what is there for me to, like, why would I pay $290 for a motherboard that is, as far as I'm concerned, objectively worse than a $250 MSI board? And now, this is admittedly the DDR5 version, but there's a DDR4 version of this motherboard that's even cheaper. Yeah, see? $240. You can save $40 on this motherboard. And some people might be like, oh, but this comes with, like, an extra M.2 heatsink cover. You can just buy an M.2 drive with a heatsink, that comes with a heatsink. Or you can, I'm pretty sure you can get M.2 heatsinks on eBay for, like, $10 a piece, if you really wanted to. So, M.2 heatsinks built into the motherboard are worth around $10 in, like, actual value, okay? So if there's a $40 price gap, I expect some extra freaking functionality. But I don't see no extra functionality. In fact, it has less M.2 slots. So this, you know, like, yeah, it didn't make it into the list. If Asrock had put a postcode on here, I might have considered it. Like, if they put a postcode, well, I don't feel like, well, no, if they put a postcode on it, I would have considered it. You know, even with the atrocious rear I/O, I would have maybe considered, like, hey, it's got a postcode. If you only have a mouse and a keyboard, then, you know, you're fine. And the postcode is incredibly helpful if you're doing memory overclocking. Anyway, moving on. Next board. Oh, look, we've got the non-Wi-Fi version, which isn't significantly cheaper. That's that's $260, actually $279, and it's literally the same board as before, except now the Wi-Fi is gone. So for comparison, oh look, this is, oh no. It's like, this is $50 cheaper than the non-Wi-Fi Extreme from Asrock. You could buy a lot of M.2 heatsinks for that. Actually, you could probably buy an entire M.2 drive for that much money. Yeah, you could have a whole extra M.2 drive for that. Oh, well, you know, like... So, you know, it's like... I feel like my criteria is pretty simple and fair. Like, this, you know, yeah. Anyway, So next we get this. And so this has even worse power stages than the Extreme. And to begin with, this didn't have a quantity advantage compared to that MSI motherboard. And it's now getting worse, right? And this is still more expensive than that MSI board. Yep, this is $250. So I think, you know, it's become abundantly clear why it is that, like, the Extreme, Wi-Fi or non-Wi-Fi, and the Steel Legend, Wi-Fi or no Wi-Fi, didn't make it into my roundup. Because these are literally just worse versions for a high, like, worse versions of the MSI Pro Z690-A for a higher price. And I do not see the reason, like, why should I recommend those boards to people? Right? Like, I do not see a single good reason to recommend one of these boards over this. Okay? Like, I'm there. So that's kind of the thing. And somebody might be like BIOS, but personally, I prefer MSI's BIOS to Asrock's BIOS any day of the week. Asrock's BIOS is probably actually no, Asrock's BIOS is very much one of my least favorite BIOSes out there. Now, some of their high-end overclocking focused Intel boards are actually really nice, but on average, I'd say Asrock BIOS is kind of the BIOS I'd want to avoid the most. Anyway, so next we get into the just, are you going to trust your fancy new expensive 12th gen CPU to that VRM over there? And those heat sinks? Like, really? I'm sure if you throw enough airflow at this, if you strap a Delta fan to it, it'll be fine. Actually, a Delta fan would probably be excessive, but, like, ultimately, yeah, I like. And admittedly, these are really cheap. Like, those are desperation boards. I guess if you're building a 12th gen based office PC, knock yourself out. Get one of these. These won't even, but I would not be surprised if these will not support the 12th gen CPUs with their stock unlimited power configuration. So, you know, even at stock, this is going to perform worse than, like, the MSI board. However, the rear I/O on this is actually better than on the Extremes, which is, like, I don't get it. Did they run out of USB ports? Like, what the hell? Why does the Steel Legend have less USB... Actually, wait. No, this does have less USB ports than this. Yeah, it does. I'm not crazy. This literally has less USB ports than a motherboard that is cheaper. And this still has the BIOS flashback button, right? Like, it's right there. You've still got that BIOS flashback button. And this is even a DDR5 board. Did they manage to at least squeeze... Oh, and they even squeezed, like, troubleshooting LEDs onto this. I just really don't like the VRM, right? Like, this is the only issue I have with, like, that's the main thing. Like, honestly, this is a better feature set, especially considering how damn cheap this board is. But, the VRM here is kind of like, you know what? No. 12600K at stock without E-cores, maybe? Yeah, that might be fine. Or, you know, if you have like a downdraft air cooler, or just if it's like you could get away with this, but I feel like this is where you're really starting to push the limits of the power delivery. Like, where it's like, you know what, this is probably not the best idea. Anyway, so that's the kind of board where it's like, yeah, I'd rather not take my chances with that. I'm sure if you throw, like, if you zip tie a fan to it, I'm sure it'll, you know, assuming the fan can go fast enough, it'll be fine. Right? Like, you have to consider the fact that, like, server motherboards have, relatively speaking, anemic VRMs, but they get away with it because they're in a rack with, you know, 12,000 RPM Delta fans forcing airflow over everything. Anyway, we get the Z690 Pro Rs, and this is actually one of the Asrock boards where I feel like, okay, this is kind of interesting. This is a reasonably interesting motherboard. It's DDR4. 13 power stage VRM. So this is actually, I think, the same VRM that you get on a Steel Legend, but this time we don't have the plastic airflow restrictor over half of the VRM, so that's nice. But look at this rear I/O. Like, so now we have a decent number of Type A's, but the Type C port disappeared. Also, that is a Realtek 2.5 gig LAN, though I don't necessarily count that as a downside. I'm just pointing that out. Okay, like that is this uses 2.5 gig Realtek LAN. So yeah, what about the Riptide? Does the Riptide fix any of my complaints? Oh, look, we finally have a... Well, I guess I could have included this. And we've got a killer E3100 2.5 gig, which as far as I know, that's actually an Intel chip. So this is actually decent. I guess I could have included that, except I can't get prices for that board. Can I? Let's see. I'll try look it up. Z690, Asrock, Riptide. How much does that cost? If it's more than $200, it's unacceptable. No. Okay, well, I guess we're going to go to PC Part Picker, because this isn't working. So the Riptide, oh, we don't have any pricing information whatsoever. No pricing information. Well, that's great. Okay, so we'll have to estimate from UK prices. Scan tends to not be too bad. So that is, okay, that's £199. We're gonna need some comparison points. I want to see like what's the like conversion rate for Asrock motherboards in the UK to in the US. So the Taichi is 539. That's actually really wait, so Z690 Extreme 260 and the Extreme regular is 269. Okay, so that board is probably $210, which means it's like right on, like it's $10 below the MSI. The MSI has more everything. Right? I'm not, yeah, I'm not imagining things. It does actually just have more everything, and that's like a $10 price difference. I don't know, should I have included this? Maybe. Like if this is significantly cheaper than that MSI board, then sure, this actually kind of makes sense. But otherwise, no. If it's anywhere near that MSI board in terms of price, I would just get that MSI board. Like a slight discount is not worth putting up with Asrock's BIOS. Anyway, so now we've covered the Riptide and the Pro RS, and, well, the Phantom Gaming 4 boards are all kind of the same thing, just, you know, like, they all use the same VRM, and that's most of what sets my verdict on those, is just, like, I do not like the VRM on those. So let's take a look at the Velocita, which is actually, like, this is one of the boards that when Z690, like, this board, I got kind of excited about it when I first saw it. Like, look at this rear I/O. We've got all of the USB ports. And then we've got 2.5 gig in Intel LAN, and it's like, okay, that, you know, depending on the price, this could be a very interesting option for dual LAN. It's got BIOS flashback, it's got a postcode, and we all know how much I love postcodes. It's got a clear CMOS button, power button, reset button. The 17-phase VRM is using, what is it using? 60 amp smart power stages, so not the world's most powerful VRM for Z690, but you know, with the heatsink that they have and the fact that they snuck a fan into the fin stack, there's a fan, you can see it right there, there's a fan in that heatsink. So with the fan in that heatsink, I'm sure the VRM thermals are going to be fine. This looks like a nice $400-ish motherboard. Oh. It's $470. Like... Like this looks to me like somewhere between like this does not look like a motherboard that should be approaching $500. And it's approaching $500, right? It's freaking $470. It's closer to 500 than to 400. And yet we get what? We get three M.2 slots, because this right here, what they're doing is they're stealing lanes from the GPU slot to get that Gen 5 M.2 slot, which I hate it when B550 motherboards do that, and I also hate it when Z690 motherboards do that, because I am consistent in my criteria. Don't steal my PCIe lanes for M.2 drives. And they have that second, like, metal reinforced PCIe slot, which is like, that could have easily been an X8. Like, you've already paid for the stupid PCIe switches. Why didn't you put an X8 slot on there instead of, like, if what they had done is had 4 M.2 slots, you know, because you'd have one off of the chips, you'd have one off the CPU, 3 off of the chipset, and then 2 X8 PCIe slots, and then added, like, included a, you know, Gen 5 PCIe to M.2 adapter card. I would have been cool with that. I think that would have actually been really cool. Like, yeah, I think that would have been cool. I think the board would have been still kind of overpriced, but as it is, this is dumb. Like this is actively dumb. Don't steal PCIe lanes for things that aren't PCIe slots. Don't do that. It's bad. I don't like it. So, yeah. And also, like, at this price point, it's completely outclassed in the VRM department. Like, the MSI Carbon has 18 phases of 75 amp power stages. This has 17 of 60s. Also, the Carbon, when I say 18 phases, that's just V-Core. That doesn't include the iGPU phase. What else do we have? So, like, you've got a worse VRM. Now, they are compensating for it by shoving that cheater fan in the VRM heatsink. So, you know, like, it'll still run cool because there's a literal fan in the frickin' VRM heatsink. I wonder what all the people who hate X570 chipset fans think about that. Actually, it's probably not as bad as the X570. Well, honestly, I've never had the X570 chipset fan spin up. That's just not like Threadripper boards do that. X570, nah. But anyway, so yeah, I don't really like, so mainly, like, my main complaint for this motherboard is the price point and the weird features that it comes with. Like, the feature set on this is just weird, in my opinion. The VRM, and then the price is too high. So that's why this didn't make it into the list. It's just kind of like, this would be cool as a $400 motherboard. It is not cool as a $470 motherboard. Like, at $400, yeah, because you could argue, like, oh, you have dual LAN, whereas the Carbon only has single LAN. Sure, you don't have the dual X8 PCIe slots, which I really think, like, to me, that's a major downside. Because the thing about PCIe slots is they're infinitely flexible. You can convert a PCIe slot to just about anything, whereas M.2 slots do not convert into just about anything. They convert into, like, Wi-Fi and SSDs. Whereas PCIe slots, you can turn them into Wi-Fi, capture cards, GPUs, you know, co-processors of various kinds. I swear I've seen PCIe slot-based oscilloscopes, RAID cards, like Optane drives, right? Like, you can stick basically anything under the sun, you can stick it into a PCIe slot. You can put Intel NUCs into PCIe slots. Don't actually, like, it's not actually a practical use. But my point is, PCIe slots are superior to every other form of, like, PCIe connector because you can adapt the PCIe slot into whatever you want, right? And this motherboard, like, actively goes out of its way to convert PCIe lanes into a less useful form factor in the form of an M.2 slot that you could have just had with an adapter card. Which, incidentally, an M.2, like a PCIe to M.2 adapter card will cost you about $70. So you could just get a Carbon, which has more onboard M.2 slots than this does, and then spend $70 to get that, you know, M.2 add-in card, and in total, you would have more M.2 slots than this does for the same price with a better VRM. Genius. Yeah, so there. So this board, like, this is literally just a case of the feature set doesn't make sense to me and it costs too much, which is sort of most of the Asrock lineup, isn't it? Well, no, the Taichi's just grossly overpriced. Then we get the Z690 Phantom Gaming ITX. This is actually a cool board, in my opinion. They might, like, here, you know, stuffing a fan into the VRM of an ITX motherboard, I think, is actually a good design decision. If you're doing it on an ATX motherboard, you have screwed up your VRM design. If you do it on an ITX motherboard, I get it, because there's just not enough space for a proper heatsink. It's an ITX board. What did you expect? And other than that, they managed to squeeze troubleshooting LEDs onto it, which is cool. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. VRM looks capable, right? 11 phases. I don't know what the actual split is, but it's on the 105 amp smart power stages. And for an ITX motherboard, 5 USB Type A's, like, yeah, it's an ITX motherboard. There's just not that much space on these. And they even managed to squeeze in a Thunderbolt port, though they didn't get a DisplayPort input, did they? No. So you don't get display pass-through on the Thunderbolt port there. But you do get clear CMOS and BIOS flashback in the rear I/O. So this could be like an interesting motherboard for, like, memory overclocking, though, you know, you could also get a Unify X, depending on how this is priced, right? If this is like $300, I think it's a cool board. If it's like $500, it is not a cool board, right? Like, ultimately, that's always the final deciding factor, is like, how much does it cost? Because it is very easy to make a motherboard that does everything and costs $1,100. Actually, no, that's not that easy. Asus managed to screw that up as well. Yeah, like, So this is actually sort of like, it's kind of funny how Asrock actually pretty consistently manages to make like pretty neat ITX boards. It does only seem to have 3 SATA ports. Yeah, it does only have 3 SATA ports. So at the same time, I guess if you're doing a small form factor build, you're probably not going to have like a massive amount of SATA drives. Like this is the whole reason I decided not to cover ITX motherboards in the Z690 roundup is just like I don't actually do small form factor builds. So my interest in ITX motherboards is basically my interest in ITX boards is the fact that they have 2 DIMM slots. The fact that they're small is completely irrelevant to me. I could not care less about what size an ITX well, no, that's not true. I do appreciate that the ITX boards I have take up less space in storage than the ATX boards do. But that's about it, right? So like the considerations of like, oh, what ITX cooling system is going to fit on this motherboard well and that kind of thing, like it's not something I think about. It's not something I appreciate. And so I decided I'm not going to talk about ITX motherboards because I just feel like I don't do like people who do ITX stuff do it because it's small. Whereas I just do it because it's almost like it's a way of getting 1 DIMM per channel memory topologies without having to go without when the extreme overclocking boards aren't available. Right? But now that there's like the Unify X, the Apex, the Dark boards, the Tachyons, the OC formulas, it's like ITX to me is just kind of like, I guess it's kind of neat. But this does look kind of like a neat board. So good job, Asrock. You made 1 motherboard in your entire product stack that isn't completely stupid. Actually, no, there's kind of 2 of them. Right? There's also the Riptide. The Riptide is like, okay, if this was slightly cheaper, that would be cool. And this is, I still don't know what the price is on that, but that is kind of cool. And Z690 MITX. So this board is like that top half of the VRM doesn't have a heatsink. Right? Like, that does not have a heatsink. What do you think's going to happen to it? So, yeah, that right there is terrifying. Well, no, not really. Depends how much CPU you put into the board, but I am not a fan of that whatsoever. It also looks like this motherboard might have interesting, like, cooler compatibility because those capacitors are awfully close to that CPU socket. Anyway, the rear I/O on this is also decent. Like, I don't get it. Why is it that they figure, well, okay, it's an ITX board, so... Wait, no, look at that. They have that weird little daughter board thing just so that they get, like, 6 Type A's in total. Yeah. So they're not running out of USB ports, they just can't be bothered to put them on the full-size motherboards where they have space for them. Anyway, did they manage to squeeze troubleshooting LEDs onto this? That would be cool. Oh, we've got more SATA ports. Thing is, I don't like the VRM on this. I'm sure if you run if you're going to run like a 12600K or something and don't push it very hard, it'll be fine. But the top half of the VRM not having a heatsink at all is just kind of like, that is going to run so hot. If you put it under heavy loads, it's going to run so freaking hot. Then again, if you're maybe doing some like low profile air cooler type thing with your ITX build, like it'll be fine, which is exactly why I, decided not to do ITX boards. Cause it's like, I've never used one of those low profile ITX coolers. Like, cause again, it's my interest in ITX is the 1 DIMM per channel one DIMM per channel, not the whole like, oh, it's small. This is just kind of like, yeah, unintended side effects is the motherboard is small for me. Anyway, and I guess you do get dual LAN, which it's Realtek 2.5 gig and Intel 1 gig. That I don't know what the price for this is either. Yeah, no pricing on that motherboard either, so that's... I guess maybe we could check on... Okay, nope. Nope, we are not going to get a... wait. No, that's an MATX board. So, yeah, anyway, that's the Asrock Z690 motherboard lineup, and... hopefully this, this explains why it is that the Z690 Asrock boards didn't make it into my roundup. Like, the Tai Chi is just freaking overpriced. Also, this is horrible. Like, I will not stop complaining about this. This is horrible. Absolutely horrible. For an ATX motherboard that costs $600 to come with a rear I/O that looks like this is ridiculous. Okay? Absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, then we have boards like the Velocita, which actually, like, I do like that. This is a good rear I/O. It's just on a, like, the board is just overpriced by quite a bit. You know, there is a price at which this motherboard makes sense, but the price it's currently at is not it, right? So that's the issue with this one. And that basically goes for the rest of Asrock's lineup as well. Is just like, these boards really cost a bit too much for how little they do. And that's true across the board, basically, in my opinion. With the exception of the ITX board, but I don't know what that costs. So, you know, maybe once the price comes out, I'll be very surprised that this is like $400, and then I'll be disappointed again. And anyway, that's it for the video. So yeah, thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, stickers, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. Both Patreon and Teespring help out immensely with running the channel, so it would be much appreciated if you check them out. And that is it for the video, so thank you for watching, and goodbye.